Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, a part of the Uniguest family, where we believe in improving quality of life for older adults by giving them digital connections. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Fink, the host of the Fading Memories podcast. I had a chance to connect with Jennifer about her caregiver story, which we'll get into here, and her experience being an adult child and navigating senior living. And I think these are the stories we need to hear. So thanks so much for joining me today, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
So first question here, what is your caregiver story?
Well, it's a little lengthy. I'll try to keep it short. My mom had Alzheimer's for at least 20 years. My maternal grandmother had vascular dementia, and my maternal great-grandmother also had dementia. For better or worse, she passed away before I was born, so I don't have any experience or memories of her. I wasn't in charge of caring for my grandmother, but there were times when, you had to step in and help. Like my mom would volunteer to watch my grandmother for the weekend, and then miraculously, she always needed me to step in for one of those days. But my family and I had a business together, and it got really obvious that my mom was having very significant memory issues. And because of my grandmother, it wasn't, in the beginning, it was easy to dismiss, but then as it got worse, it was like, this is not a good sign. And I ended up having to kind of be like a helicopter caregiver because I didn't want clients to know she had an issue. I didn't want to offend my mom, but it was really stressful trying to maintain your work and positive client relations and manage your mother's, lack of ability to take proper instructions, write down due dates, minor things that make getting jobs definitely a little easier. My dad did most of the caregiving from 2005 to when they retired from that business to March of 2017 when he passed away. Unfortunately for me, we never had a conversation about what would happen with my mom if my dad died first. Now, my dad had diabetes. He'd had a kidney transplant in March of 2009. He had all kinds of other health issues. Being on anti-rejection meds, not necessarily the best thing in the world for you. Yeah. And he was one of those patients where every time there was an issue, they just gave him a new drug. And then those side effects, then it was like, oh, well, you have these side effects, so we'll give you new drugs. So he was a mess. And I think caring for my mom, just between his health issues and taking care of her, it just ground him down to, kind of nothing, mostly because he didn't accept help from me, which I understand, from a social and generational situation, but boy, is that dumb. So he was on hospice. My mom was getting bounced around between her home, my home. And I quickly learned that her moving in with me was not an option whatsoever. So after while my dad was on hospice, I went looking for a care home, and we can get into that bit later. But, it was a journey, and I had to learn how to be an effective caregiver for somebody in the later stages of Alzheimer's kind of overnight. Because after he died, it was all on me. And it was like, boy, you quickly learn that you don't know enough.
Wow. Yeah, that is quite the journey. And you kind of experience a little bit of everything there. And, I'm curious because now you're hosting this podcast, and you're trying to bring some more awareness to kind of your story and other people's stories out there. But, what was the inspiration for your Fading Memories podcast?
Oh, this is a good story. So I've always been a podcast listener back in the day when you actually had to listen to them through your web streaming, web browser. And I'm also a retired portrait photographer. So I'd be making the computer run Photoshop and stream a podcast, to which my computer was like, pick one. And so when they came out with podcast players, I got back into them. The catalyst for starting my own show was kind of something that a lot of caregivers end up doing, not necessarily starting a podcast, but I was trying to research and read and do internet research on how to connect with my mom better, how to have better visits. My mom was really big on, she just wanted to sit around and shoot the breeze, which would have been fine, but it was the same breeze over and over and over. After, 30 minutes, I was like, I'd like to slam my head into the wall, which obviously is not good for my cognitive health. And I kept thinking there's got to be a better way. And, back in the old days when one used to drive a car to the gym to go do an exercise class, I was listening to podcasts and I was like, I should look for one on caregiving because there's podcasts on everything, as you probably know, including the funeral home business, which doesn't seem like something people would want to listen to, but it's available. And when I got home and I looked, there was one. So this was late 2017. This other podcast's been around a long time. They're still around. I'm like, okay, well, one is better than nothing. But unfortunately for me in some respects, it just really wasn't my cup of tea. Just fine. We're all not going to like the same things. And I kept thinking there's got to be other family caregivers like myself, especially ones whose loved ones live with them, that, they don't have time for all this deep research and reading of books and still coming up with answers that don't work or no answers. Time is precious. So I thought, well, I can't be the only one. So I'll just start my own show.
I love that. Hey, it's one of those things, right? If you can't find what you're looking for, go and build it, right? And yeah, it's super important. And I'm grateful that you did, because I feel like there's not enough people talking about this, and especially with kind of the demographics and where it's going, there's going to be a lot more caregivers seeking out resources such as what the Fading Memories is doing. And I'm curious, like, what have you learned along the way, whether during your caregiving journey or and the creation of your podcast?
There's a lot of support available, but it's scattered everywhere. And there are companies and organizations that are trying to bring everything into like one database, or trying to bring it all together. Because again, you're caring for somebody with, a life-limiting disease, especially something like Alzheimer's or some other dementia-causing disease. You don't have time to go out and search for all this different stuff. You need it like spoon-fed to you because you got 500 other very serious things to handle. It is changing. It's changing slowly, unfortunately. When I started my show in mid-2018, there was 2 of us at that point. Now there's a whole bunch of us. It'd be nice if Apple and Spotify would actually come up with a category that fits, these supportive shows. I'm sure there's AA and NA type shows that also have the same search problem that we do. But the other thing is that while everybody's journey with the disease is different, there's a lot of similarities, and learning from other caregivers is so beneficial because you learn useful things, but you also don't feel like you're alone. And I have talked to more caregivers who have created something out of their caregiving journey. They've written books, they've created apps, they've started coaching businesses, podcasts. Some of them do all the above. They're the overachievers. And it's kind of nice to see that the stigma is changing. When I started my show, you did not, plaster your loved one all over the internet. You didn't show them living with the disease. That was like inappropriate and disrespectful, and that is 100% different these days. People are still careful how they show their loved ones, and sometimes that leads to a little bit of false, what's the word? A false perception, because a lot of people, if your loved one is having a good day, it's easy to show that off. Most people don't show when their loved one is having a very huge struggle and they're angry and yelling and not being a nice person. That you don't see that very often. So, but there's people that are starting to talk about that more. So, gal that was on Instagram earlier today, basically saying, "I love my mom, but I don't like who she is anymore." And I have not talked about that a lot on social media, but I kind of felt the same way. It's like my parents had very high expectations of me, and it was very difficult to try to figure out, how do I give my mom the best quality of life and the most joy and deal with this disease and the ever-changing, person that she is. That was a huge struggle. And I felt like I did the best job I possibly could. But in the back of my head, I kept thinking, man, I wish I could do this better, or why is it so hard for me and not other people? So, fortunately, talking to a lot of terrific caregivers and doctors and researchers and all the interesting people I talk to, I've learned that, you know, most people feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense, right? I think seeking out others that are kind of going through your own thing, I think, at times we get stuck in this Truman Show philosophy and just think it's all about us, right? Classic movie. And, we find that there's other people who understand what you're going through, and it's important to find those people. I know I interviewed someone living with dementia who had mentioned that, like, the Alzheimer's Association that I see, representing behind you, like, that saved his life because he met other people that was going through the same thing and really helped to open up his eyes to others living with that. Um, and along your journey, I know you had moved your mom into a senior living community. In our conversation before this, you had mentioned that you thought senior living was a better alternative than living at home. And I'm just kind of curious why you think that.
Well, I should back that up with my husband's a real estate broker. So being in favor of abandoning your single family home is not something that most realtors would embrace. Now I have trained him. I have brought him over to the dark side. The challenge we have in this country is the American dream is, you own your home, you got the white picket fence, the golden retriever, which mine is laying next to the dog treats right now. And we don't want to give that up. I mean, we work hard to get there. We work hard to keep it. And, we don't want to give it up. That's our independence. That's, our home. People they give a lot of meaning to the walls. Like, I brought the babies home here or the grandkids here or whatever. It's like, it's just walls. The memories are up here in your brain. Hopefully they stay there. They don't fade away. But my philosophy is, and a lot of this is because I've watched him deal with older adults and their homes, is, you get to like 85. Why do you want to cook, clean, deal with the landscaper? Maybe you're dealing with a housekeeper, home's age. So you got to deal with maintenance. It's a lot. Like, taking care of a home is pretty much a full-time job in a lot of respects. Why would you want to do that when you're 85? Like, is that really your retirement dream, that you want to, like, be a slave to your home, to the walls, to the maintenance and everything? When I moved my mom into memory care, it was not fun. It was not fun for 6 weeks. She never wanted to do that. She always said, I want to live forever in my home, but I don't want to be a burden to you. Thank you, Mom. Those are mutually exclusive. And I also knew I had a business that I worked out of my home. I had clients that came to my home. I knew there's no way she could live with me. She would be terribly miserable. I would be terribly miserable. It just was not the right option. Once she got settled in the memory care, forgot about her home, she had friends. She had friends in memory care that she did mischief with. She did activities that they provided that she flatly refused to do with me. It could be the exact same thing and be like, no, I'm not interested. So she had a social life. She actually kind of had a purpose, because my mom was in her 70s. They had, residents in their 80s and 90s. And a lot of them used walkers or wheelchairs. So my mom would always be, hang out her door and be like, let me know if you need any help, which always cracked me the heck up, because, like, lady, you can barely help yourself. But it gave her a sense of worth, and it was kind of who she was before Alzheimer's. And it allowed me to be more of the daughter. Actually, she thought I was her best friend, instead of the person that was in charge, the person that, insisted we needed to take a shower a couple times a week, or, we're going to eat now, or no, we're not going to do that. It's like, I didn't have to do a lot of that. And so it just, I learned, let's see, my paternal grandmother was the same way. She was mostly blind from glaucoma, lived by herself in her own home until she was 101, 101,
Wow.
102. She burned out my poor aunt, because obviously if you can't see, it's pretty difficult to cook for yourself. You can't drive yourself to appointments. And I figured when they had to move her into a board and care home, I figured, well, that'll be the end of that because she never wanted that. And I just learned this past Thanksgiving that my grandmother, my Nana, as we called her, absolutely loved the board and care home.
Mm.
I was so gobsmacked at that state. I was like, are you kidding me? This woman refused. She refused to hire people. She refused to pay family to do all the things that needed to be done. She just had very high expectations. So, and board and care homes aren't quite the same as memory care or assisted living or independent living. I just kind of feel like we need to shift our thoughts on what, maybe the last 15 to 20 years of our life should look like. Wouldn't you rather wake up in the morning, pour your caffeinated beverage of choice? I happen to be a tea drinker. And let somebody else feed you breakfast. Let somebody else offer you activities that you can pick and choose from for the day. Maybe if you're not, like, I know I won't be driving in my 80s. I already got crappy vision. It's maybe not a good idea at this point. There'll be a bus that can take me to the doctor or to shopping. So you're still independent. You're still making choices, but you don't got to worry about grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning up, who's mowing the lawn, is the roof leaking. I'm in Northern California. We had so much rain. I'm surprised I got a roof left,
Yeah.
And we were out of town for a week, the beginning of the year. And I was just like, oh my God, when we get home, like, we got to like really check all the ceilings, and we got to, because this house was built in 88. I was convinced there was going to be, rain damage. And, that's not how you want to be thinking when you're on vacation. So why do you want to do that when you're, retired, and you should be enjoying your family and your great grandkids and grandkids? And, I think people need to realize that it actually gives you more independence by getting rid of a lot of the obligations that come with taking care of a house.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I know, my grandmother lived in her home until she fell and was on the ground for 24 hours. And, from there, she had to kind of move into a place. But it's so true, right? Like, I'm 34 and I don't want to do half of those things you mentioned today in terms of like, all the like maintenance and stuff. And yeah. And, one of the questions too, I'm curious in, because I think you make a great point in terms of the independence and, what our industry would refer to you in addition to caregivers, like being an adult child, right? Where you're kind of helping your mom guide and navigate a lot of these things. And I imagine you look for more than just one community for her, but I'm wondering, like, what did you look for in a community that felt right for your mom?
Well, this is actually another funny story. So there was an independent, or not an assisted living memory care community literally a mile down the hill from my house. I could have rode my bike. I could have walked the dogs, which would have been nice because I did take my golden retrievers to visit mom a couple of times. But their memory care was very dark. It was like double doors. You had to get buzzed into the lobby and then buzzed in, and it really felt like a jail. And I knew my husband went down there while my dad was on hospice. He came home so pale and so freaked out. He's like, I would never put your parents there. I'm like, well, don't worry about it. That wasn't really on the list. Unfortunately, because, a mile down the hill from your house, pretty convenient. So I started, then I had to go to the next town over, because at that point, so this was 2017, early 2017, there was only one assisted living community with memory care in my town. There was another assisted living community, but mom was far beyond that. So we went the next town over. It's about a 15-minute drive, as long as you did not go when the school was getting let out. So there was two schools, actually there were three, between me and where mom was. I went, the place was very lovely. The people were very nice. And I laugh because I did not do any of the requisite investigations. I went, I liked what I saw. I liked what they said. I knew in the back of my head, the gal was a salesperson. So I kept that in mind. But it all came down to one simple thing. When I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with my mom's dog. My mom had a black miniature poodle. And they said, well, we could probably arrange something with that. I literally could not throw money at them faster. And I have been on other podcasting shows as this is probably not the best way to do this. But she had, a great experience. And, there was never I never felt like there was anything I needed to address, like problems. I mean, other than they had to lock things up for the residents' protections. And I'm like, can I just have a key? Because finding you guys to get a key to unlock the vanity under the bathroom sink's really annoying. I got a no to that. But yeah, no, it was, I got lucky. I basically went on gut instinct, but there are ways of checking licensing, and I didn't even do a Google search for reviews, anything. I didn't do any of it.
Wow. Hey, that's your experience, right? And that's what, and I mean, really speaks to, right, the first community you went to, and, not wanting to do that, even though it was so close. I think it really speaks to that, and that it is interesting. And, I'm happy to hear that your mom had a good time there. And then my final question here for you, Jennifer, is, being an adult child and a caregiver, is there anything you would want to see change within the senior living industry as we move forward?
Well, the one challenge, and I know this was a challenge before COVID, it's definitely a challenge worse now. They did not have a lot of turnover in the memory care where my mom lived, which obviously my gut instinct about them was correct. But there was never quite enough staff, and they didn't have enough training to deal with things like shower reluctance. Or there was one gal that liked to sit in her room and just literally go, help, help me, help. I mean, just constantly. And it was not like distress. It literally sounded like just the way I did it. And they just got to the point where they would poke their head in every 15 or 20 minutes to make sure she didn't really need help. But they kind of got to the point where they had to ignore her. And I'm sure with better training and maybe a few more staff, they could have figured out why she was saying it. There was a reason she was saying it. It wasn't that she needed help or was in some sort of distress, but there was something she needed, and that was the only way she could verbalize that she needed either to go to the toilet, or she was bored, or I don't know what it was. I had to deal with my mother, so it's like I'm only going to take on one at a time here. So, and I know that's a big problem. They didn't get paid enough either. Almost all of them had 2 jobs. The 2 gals that I was really close with literally worked at Starbucks in the morning for 8 hours and then went and worked at memory care for 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So, those places are expensive enough. I don't know where the money's going. I've made my husband do some realtor research on like the side, like where my mom lived. What's the tax base? What's the property worth? Because you can find all this stuff out when you're a broker. It's public knowledge. But it still seems, it's not cheap. I mean, like I said, I'm in California. Land isn't cheap. Buildings aren't cheap. Nothing's cheap. So I don't know how we shift the pay and staffing situation without the price going up even higher.
Yeah.
That's a giant problem to tackle.
No, but it's important to know that. I mean, some of these places, it is pretty wild how expensive they can be. And I think, putting it back into their people and finding the better staffing ratios and technology to ultimately improve that quality of life is super important, right? And it's where I think a lot of people are trying to get to, but I know a lot of people are struggling to hire right now, as is many verticals. Yeah. So
I think one thing that could be utilized, and you mentioned it, is technology. And the dog just moved, which made me remember I had a conversation with a dog trainer, and they train dogs to be caregivers. And they could have a couple of community dogs. So the memory care where my mom lived was like 30 to 32 beds. My mom had a private room, so it's kind of hard for me to remember exactly how many, but it was under 40. It's like between 30 and 36, I think. And they loved it when I brought my dogs. There's one gal, I thought she was going to, she was not happy that he had a pinch collar on. And she was very unhappy with me about that. And I didn't think I was going to get him back from her.
Oh, wow.
Like, oh, great. I got to wrestle this 60-pound dog away from this little tiny old lady. It's just like, this is not cool. She just glommed onto him. But, dogs can lower people's blood pressure. They can calm anxieties. And if there's a dog that's raised to basically live in a community, they can provide some of those things when the humans are busy dealing with other things, because we know staffing is going to be a problem. Was a problem before COVID. It's definitely worse now. And then the use of technologies. There's a lot of that coming on board that I think could help. If you can only get 12 good people, and then you've got a dog or two and some technology that, makes it seem like these 12 people are like 24. I think that's probably the way it's going to end up going, which is kind of interesting because my mom and technology weren't necessarily things that I put together.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think, every year the technology gets a little bit better, it gets a little bit easier to use, and there's some really cool things happening there. So, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me for today. I'll put your podcast in the notes here, and other people can go and check out what you're all about. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.